Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Shelby and today I'm going to be doing my weekly reading wrap up from April 29th to today, May 5th. I cannot believe it is already May. I feel like the time is flying by this year. So this week I read a total of 8 books. I read 4 mystery thrillers and I read 4 romance contemporary type of books. I'm really pleased with how much I read this week because I did read a couple of larger books. I will link all of the books down below and I'd love to hear what you guys are reading, and let's get right into it. So the first book that I read is Sweet Pea by CJ Skews, and I recently picked this up from Book Outlet and I wanted to jump into it right away because it sounded so good. So this follows a woman named Rhiannon who seems like your average 20-something girl. She goes to work, she lives with her boyfriend, she has her friends that she goes out with. But she is not your average 20-something girl. She makes these lists every day of the people in her life that she wants to kill. They could be someone really important like her boyfriend, or they could be just like the mailman or the person at the grocery store. And she makes these really funny notes about who she wants to kill at the start of each chapter. And the chapters are kind of written in a diary format. So Rhiannon actually likes to kill people and she's a serial killer, and we start off the book knowing that she killed someone a few years ago and she's had this dry spell of killing people, and she has now surged back into the world of killing people. So she is a serial killer and we see through the eyes of this sociopath, psychopath, and into her mind, and her inner thoughts are really funny. And it's like the observations she makes on the daily basis made me laugh out loud, and I was reading them to my husband because they just reminded me of my own personal thoughts sometimes, which is hilarious because she is a serial killer and relating to a serial killer I think is really funny. So I thought this was a really clever book, and although it was really long, it went by really quick because the text is rather large. I think I got just like some really large edition, but I really enjoyed this and I cannot wait to pick up In Bloom, which is book number 2, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. Next book that I read is On the Island by Tracy Garvis Graves. You guys saw me talk about this in my reading vlog if you watched that, and this is a forbidden romance between Anna and TJ. So Anna is a 30-year-old teacher. TJ is a 16-year-old student who is recovering from cancer, and during his sophomore year of high school he missed a lot of school for chemo treatments, and so his parents hire a tutor for him for the summer named Anna, and they are to go to a tropical island. Well, while they're on their charter plane, it's just them and the pilot, and their plane goes down, the pilot dies, and they are stranded on an island and no one knows they're there and no one knows how to find them. So they're stuck there for years and have to survive. And as time goes on, he's no longer a teenager and he becomes an adult, and a romance forms between TJ and Anna. And this one was a really heartbreaking story. It was really scary that they had to be on this island and survive. And you also just see them bond because they are the only 2 people on this island and they have to rely on each other. And I thought this was a great story, and then part of the story does follow what happens when they leave the island. And I just overall loved this book and I gave it 4.5 stars. The next book that I read is The Family Next Door by Sally Hepworth. I also read this in my reading vlog and I really liked this one. I've read one other Sally Hepworth called The Mother-in-Law and I loved that one. This follows 3 mothers and wives who live in a suburban neighborhood. Their names are Fran, Angie, and Essie, and they appear to have the perfect life, the perfect husbands, the perfect marriages, the perfect children, but obviously appearances are deceiving and they're all going through their own personal troubles in their personal lives. And this woman named Isabel, who is not married, she does not have children, she moves onto their street and it kind of throws them all for a loop. They're wondering why this single childless woman is moving on their street and they cannot stop meddling about her, and she seems really interested in them. Well, Essie is one of the 3 women who has a lot of issues going on in her personal life. She instantly takes a liking to Isabel and her and Isabel become quick friends. But what she doesn't know is Isabel has an agenda of her own, and you don't know if it is a bad agenda. And this was a really good domestic drama. I really enjoy Sally Hepworth's writing. It reminds me a lot of Liane Moriarty, who is also a domestic drama writer with a little bit of a mystery element to it, and so I love that it is kind of a women's fiction with a mystery element. I highly recommend this one and I gave it 4.25 stars. The next book that I read is The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata. I was really excited to read this one as it was on my May TBR, and I read it through Kindle Unlimited. It was an extremely long book. It was over 600 pages, which is crazy, so it did take me a little while to get through it. And this is a slow burn romance because Mariana Zapata is known for being the slow burn romance queen, and this was definitely that. It is also a sports romance. So the two main characters are Aiden and Vanessa. Vanessa has been a personal assistant for a pro football player named Aiden Graves, who is also known as the Wall of Winnipeg because he's from Canada. And Aiden plays for the 300s, which is a Dallas football team. And he is not really that friendly. So Vanessa's been working for him for 2 years and he barely even says 2 words to her. He's not very friendly at all and they don't really like each other. But finally, Vanessa is going to quit her job. She wants to follow her dream of being a graphic designer and she saved up enough money to be able to quit. So she quits her job and Aiden doesn't even care that she's leaving. But then weeks after she leaves, he shows up at her doorstep and demands that she comes back. He's pretty thrown for a loop because she had no idea that Aiden even cared that she was around. And not only does he want her to come back to work for him, he also wants her to be his wife. But it's because he is not an American citizen and his visa is going to expire. So he begs Vanessa to be his wife. And although Vanessa doesn't want to, he makes her an offer she cannot deny. And so she moves in with him and they get married, and it is their romance, and it was super slow burn. And I really enjoyed this. I don't want to say too much more other than that there is a slow burn, fake dating, fake marriage type of romance. And I loved this, and I love how because it was so long and so slow, you really got to see their relationship develop and you learned a lot about each character, and they're both pretty damaged people in their past, and I loved this one. I gave it 5 stars. The next book that I read is Bring Me Back by B.A. Paris. I actually did a buddy read with my friend Beth over at Beth and the Books. She just made a YouTube channel, so you guys should definitely check her out. She also has an Instagram, but I will link her YouTube down below, and we read this together. This is our first buddy read together, and we had a lot of fun reading this together. And we both kind of had similar thoughts about the book. It is about a man named Finn who 12 years ago, his girlfriend Layla went missing, and it's been 12 years and there's been no sign of what happened to her, or no body has been found either. And during that 12 years since her disappearance, he's actually grown really close to Layla's older sister Ellen, and they are engaged to be married. Basically bonded over the loss of Layla and formed this relationship, and now they're going to be getting married. Well, soon after their engagement, some weird things start happening. These little Russian dolls start popping up in their life, and that was a token that Layla would collect, and no one would know that except Ellen and Finn, and so it's kind of creeping them out. And also Finn starts receiving these emails from someone that claims to be Layla or know where Layla is, and they both are kind of wondering, is Layla alive? But he thinks it might be someone just playing a trick on them. And so you're kind of unraveling currently, as well as maybe what happened 12 years ago. And unfortunately, the ending and the twist was very predictable, and both myself and Beth guessed it, which is a bummer. I like to be surprised. So this one was a little bit underwhelming for me. I feel the same about it as I did Behind Closed Doors, which I did not love either. So I gave this one 3 stars. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, and I do plan on reading B.A. Paris's 3rd novel. I like their stories, but don't love them. The next book that I read is 5 Years From Now by Paige Toon. This is last year's release by Paige Toon, and this is a contemporary women's fiction romance between 2 people named Van and Nell. They met when they were 5 years old because Van's mother was dating Nell's father, and him and his mother moved in with Nell's father. And basically they are the same age. They are sharing bunk beds in their room, and they play together and have fun, and for years they are in each other's lives. And then when they're 10 years old, something tears them apart. Van is shipped off to Australia to live with his father, whereas Nell stays in England and lives with her father. And so they're torn apart, but they are brought back together when they're 15, and instead of feeling this friendship between them, they actually start a romance. But again, they are torn apart, and so it follows them every 5 years being brought back together, being torn apart, and whether or not they are supposed to be together, you don't really know, and you don't know how it ends, but you know that the story ends when they're 40 years old. So it follows every 5 years until they're 40. And this was a really emotional book. It had me crying a little bit. And it really had me questioning about when you meet someone, if they're meant to be in your life forever. And the ending of this was really bittersweet, but it felt right and it didn't feel like heartbreaking. But I really like how Paige Toon's books get me on a different level and they're not just cliche. And I highly recommend this. I ended up giving it 4.25 stars. Next book that I read is I Know Who You Are by Alice Feeney. I was super excited to read this because I loved Sometimes I Lie. A lot of my Goodreads friends gave this really high rating, so I was really excited to see if I loved it as well. This follows a woman named Amy Sinclair who is an actress, and her husband Ben one day goes missing, and it was after they had an argument. And she thinks that maybe he just left her, but he left behind his wallet, his phone, his keys, and his car, which is very unusual, so she assumes something bad happened to him. When she goes to the cops, they start investigating, and all the evidence they find points back to Amy doing something to Ben, but she has no memory of harming her husband. And so she starts to question if she's going crazy and if she actually did do something to Ben, but in her mind, she believes that she didn't. It's told through two different timelines, so currently when her husband goes missing, and then 20 years ago in 1987 when her life changes completely and her life basically goes down the hole and a lot of crazy things happen to her in her childhood. So you're seeing currently and then and kind of wondering how these two stories are going to merge together, and you're wondering if she was the one who hurt her husband, if she's capable of doing that, and you're wondering how it relates to her past. And so it does end up relating to her past. I did not guess the ending, but I thought it was not that great. I thought the storytelling was enjoyable and it was clever, but I really hated the ending and I did not like the direction that it took at all. And so I was really shocked because I loved Sometimes I Lie, and this one just did not work for me. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars, which is maybe a little bit generous. I want to read more by Alice Feeney as she publishes more books, but this one just was not a favorite. The last book that I read is 1,000 Letters by Stacey Hart. This is the second book in her Austen series, and this is a second chance romance between Wade and Elliot, who were high school sweethearts, and they were supposed to get married after high school and be together, but unfortunately they are torn apart, and Wade goes off to Army boot camp, and for the next year after he left, Elliot wrote him letters, but he never replied to her, and so Elliot is just forced to move on with her life. Well, now it has been 7 years, and she lived with her sister, and she's a live-in nanny for her niece and nephew, and she is kind of stagnant in what's happening in her life, but she always still thinks about Wade, and it's kind of hard to forget him because her best friend Sophie is Wade's little sister. And something really tragic happens to Wade and Sophie's father. And so Wade comes back home, and basically him and Elliot are forced to be together again, and it's really hard for them to be in the same vicinity. It brings back a lot of heartbreaking feelings. And of course it is their second chance romance. It is not like the first book that was a rom-com. This one is definitely more serious. It talks about things like war and death and chronic illness. I wanted to emotionally connect with it more, but I just couldn't. There was some kind of emotional disconnect for me. It just did not hit me very hard, and I just didn't love the romance a lot between Elliot and Wade. I didn't feel like I got to know who they were back in high school, and I think this story definitely could have benefited from dual timelines where we see them falling in love in high school and then falling in love again as adults. But yeah, that didn't happen. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I definitely loved the first book, Wasted Words, a lot more, but I do plan on continuing with the series. So those are all the books that I read this week. I would love to hear if you guys have read any of these and if you liked them, and I will see you guys on my next one. Bye.